Now for what's trending in true crime, the search for two missing Georgia firefighters has come to a tragic end. The bodies of Reagan Anderson and Chandler Coffindaffer were recovered in Tennessee on Sunday. The two were last seen in Georgia almost a week ago. And Chandler's mom spoke to us here on Opening Statements on Friday. She told us about Reagan's toxic reaction to Chandler going out on a date.
And she found his car and where they were at and came and keyed his car while he was on the date, and he called the police. She subsequently went to jail and bonded out on her own, but during that time she was calling and texting my son because she's terrified for her to lose her job. They are great firefighters. This is just, she's not in the right headspace at all.
Now, we reached back out to Jane Coffindaffer after hearing about Chandler's death. And although she says she's not ready to speak, she hopes that her son's death draws attention to the stigma of abuse on men, referring to emotional abuse. Our question this morning, the biggest red flags in the case of Coffindaffer. Let's bring in our guests. Joining me now, retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Franz, and retired criminal defense attorney Kirk Nurmi. Great to see you all. We heard about the toxicity, the red flags. Mom Jane knew it all. She had the bad feeling, and sadly she was right. As we look at this case and looking at it objectively, I want to ask each of you the things you saw as the biggest red flags here. Agent Coffindaffer, would you start us off, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Julie. Thank you for having me. First of all, anytime when you have a relationship that begins with threatening, threats and instability and verbal assaults and accusations, the things that we've been hearing about that occurred in this relationship, and then you have it followed up with something physical such as that key strike against the car. That's when things start getting elevated, and that person is willing to take a physical offense toward the person that they're angry at. So to me, that was the biggest indication of serious trouble afoot.
Yes, yes. Kirk Nurmi, to you next, please. A lot of people wondering if we're going to see results from this investigation indicating a murder-suicide. Your thoughts on that possibility, please?
Well, that's certainly possible given what we've heard. Like Jennifer mentioned, the acts of violence is that crossing of the line, that someone is willing to break the law. I think we see a lot of these people, when we talk about red flags, their identity becomes so consumed by the relationship that they fear the end of the relationship is really going to be the the end of who they are. So that's certainly a possibility that needs to be explored, and I don't want to speculate at this point in time, but at the same time, yes, that crossing the line into violence, it makes it seem like that's certainly a very good possibility, Julie.
Right, Kirk, thank you for that. Last but certainly not least, Franz Borghardt, want to go to you on this. What are you thinking about this morning as we get into this investigation?
What I'm thinking about is how preventable this is, right? And it's becoming more and more normal, Julie, and that's the scary part, right? It's becoming more, we're seeing headlines of toxic relationship leads in this, and it shouldn't be normal. It's very preventable, and maybe if there's any kind of value in what's happened to these two individuals is we can all have a little bit deeper conversation with those we care about that are in toxic relationships to say, hey, look, there is a way out. You can get out. It doesn't have to end this way. And this is what is sadly happening around the country right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Franz. Great point. Before we end this discussion, if you or someone you know is in crisis, please call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. We want to turn now to some other big trending news. The search continues this morning for a missing woman from the United States who's gone missing in the Bahamas. Police say that 41-year-old Taylor Casey, who's from Chicago, was last seen around Paradise Island on June 19th. She traveled there to the islands for a yoga retreat. No details have been released on whether any foul play is suspected. According to a statement that retreat organizers released, they learned of her disappearance when Casey failed to attend some morning classes. Investigators did recover Casey's cell phone, but it's unclear the distance it was from the yoga retreat. So we're wondering this morning, what could we learn from her phone, if anything? Let's bring back in our guests and talk about this. Jennifer Coffindaffer, back to you here. Your thoughts on what story the phone could possibly tell?
Well, certainly there could be data retrieved. I know that from the information I read, that phone was found very close to the water. And that's obviously very concerning in these situations. The waters in and around the Bahamas can be dangerous. And certainly there's been other tourists and travelers that have gone that have lost their lives in the water. So I see that as a possibility. Look, this was a yoga retreat for the stars. And I think a wonderful, relaxing place. And so I have no information that would point to somebody stalking her there and committing a horrible crime. So leaning toward an accident, but we still have much investigation left to be done.
Right. Kirk Nurmi, to you next, please. You heard Jennifer say, could this be accidental? And then, of course, I know when I first read the news, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, was this a kidnapping? Was this a kidnapping? A woman who may be unfamiliar with her surroundings? I'm curious your thoughts on that possibility.
Well, anything's possible at this point because the investigation is still in its infancy. But I tend to agree with Jennifer. Accident is the most likely outcome. But one of the things that we can see here when we talk about the phone, where it was recovered, of course, is key. But what was on it? Where did she go? Was she having contact with anyone, any strangers, maybe any people in the area? Was she having meetings with anyone? Just to kind of rule out the possibility if there was any kind of interference, any kind of relationship she had with someone that might have gone awry, or that some kind of subterfuge was used to lure her somewhere. Things of that nature need to be ruled out before we talk about the possibility of accident and or some kind of intentional kidnapping.
Right. Kirk, thank you for that. Franz, I want to talk to you about the family. It is just heartbreaking seeing Taylor Casey's mother down there in the Bahamas, people who love her. They're just distraught, as anyone would be when their loved one just vanishes. And they're saying this isn't like her. I've seen them, doing other interviews. And thoughts on what the family's going through. Any advice for the family members at this time?
So the problem with these kind of deaths, and I use the word intentionally death because we don't know what happened yet, is sometimes having no answers is far worse than having answers. Especially when it's in a foreign country where you don't necessarily know how what their level of investigation is, what their government system is. If I were in a foreign country trying to find out what happened to a lost loved one, I would be at the consulate trying to work with the U.S. government, trying to lean on the consulate as much as possible. But look, at the end of the day, the fact that the cell phone was found is tremendously good. We will, like Kurt said, we're going to have some answers when we get through and crack the cell phone data. The fact that the cell phone was found probably lends itself more to accident than some kind of foul play, only because if you're going to kidnap her and you're going to do something with her, you're going to take the thing of value if you're going to hold her hostage. And I'm not trying to say this because I have some kind of insight. I'm just saying the fact that we have the phone makes me optimistic that we may be able to get some kind of answers and give them some kind of closure.
Right. Franz, thank you for that. We'll leave it there for now. If we learn anything about the disappearance of Taylor Casey, we will share the information live. Still ahead here on Opening Statements, new information and the death of a pregnant Massachusetts woman could bring her family some justice. We'll talk about what famed forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden has found when he looked into Sandra Birchmore's death. And you're looking live at pictures outside of the courthouse where the Karen Reed trial is taking place. Coming up on Opening Statements, a woman who confronted the Karen Reed supporters last week and again this morning is joining us live. This morning, we're shining a spotlight on some new information that could bring justice to the family of a pregnant Massachusetts woman found dead back in 2021. 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore was 3 months pregnant when she was found dead inside of her Canton apartment. Now, Canton is the same town where the Karen Reed saga is unfolding. Birchmore's death was ruled a suicide by investigators. Now, according to the Boston Globe, the Birchmore family hired famed forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden to review Birchmore's autopsy, and he concluded the cause of death was strangulation. He's saying this is a homicide case. Now, the Birchmores hired Dr. Baden, according to the Boston Globe, because they're suing the town and 3 officers who they claim engaged in inappropriate sexual relations with Birchmore while she was a minor and part of the Stoughton Police Explorers program. That's a program for kids. Now, all 3 of them, William Farwell, Matthew Farwell, and former Stoughton Deputy Chief Richard Devine, have all left the department. And they also have all declined to comment on the investigation. Let's talk about this. Let me bring back in retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer and retired criminal defense attorney, the man who famously represented Jodi Arias and saved her life, Kirk Nurmi. Kirk, let me begin with you, please. In your view, how might Dr. Baden's findings change this whole case legally?
Well, you know, we got to go back to the reality of where this sprung, right? Canton, and we know the kind of the misdeeds they have presented in court. The Commonwealth has been open to charging some woman when there's no science behind the accident. So when we talk about this plethora of science and lack of investigation, that's where it becomes problematic, not just from the lawsuit point of view, but the court of public opinion, right? And so you see this possibility, this specter, that these 3 men that have left the department, and we can't make any accusations against them, but the suit makes accusations against them that are really troubling. And we see then that maybe this isn't being fully investigated. So someone with the prestige of Dr. Baden comes in and says, listen, these are some of the things that were happening. This was a murder. That needs to be really taken a look at in more depth, as opposed to just what the Canton police tells us, because their word is not very valuable to the population.
I appreciate that point, Kirk Nurmi. I want to play a clip from a Karen Reed supporter outside of the courthouse who brought up this case. Let's watch.
I think it spoke to us because we're locals. So my bestie lives in Canton. I'm a Stoughton resident. The Sandra Birchmore story really spoke to me. I have a child in the middle school, and it was local, and we knew it just didn't sit right.
Jennifer Coffindaffer, to you here, please. Something that's become clear to me as the days and weeks have gone on is that these protesters, supporters, whatever you want to call them, people wearing pink, they are there for different reasons. I've learned that it's not all about Karen Reed for some of these people, and the Sandra Birchmore case is talked about. Do you think that in a way this is being conflated by the 2 cases are being conflated by some members of the public perhaps who have a distrust for the police?
Well, I've always said, Julie, that this case mimics, in a way, the OJ case in this way. In the OJ case, there were huge issues concerning race and race relations and Rodney King. And in this case, there are huge concerns concerning political corruption and corruption of the police. And when you look at the Sandra Birchmore case, there can be no other finding in terms of what I've read and what even the Stoughton police put out, that these officers were having relations with this young girl at as early as 15 years old. Now, if that's proven, that's statutory rape, and that's a very serious allegation. Then, Julie, when we look at the particulars of her suicide, she was found with a cord ligature around her neck, tied to a closet handle. The individual left her place, one of the officers accused of this relationship, and was the last to see her alive. I mean, I understand now. Then you go to Baden's findings. He says also nothing was done with her clothing in terms of analysis, and that's problematic. They should be looking for signs of DNA from somebody who could have possibly caused this situation to happen. So it's a concerning case, and I agree with you. It's sort of been intertwined with Karen Reed.
Jennifer, right. And the intertwining of cases shouldn't happen. Every case is separate, as we know. Every case factually is different from the next. I can see why it's being brought up, though. I can see why it's being raised. And yes, to your point, Jennifer, if this woman was raped by these people who, the claim, the allegation, by members of her family is that they suspect abuse, sexual abuse. If that happened, all of them need to be prosecuted and to the fullest extent of the law and penalized accordingly for this, if it happened. We don't know. But where do we go from here to find that answer? Kirk Nurmi, let's talk about that. To find out if this woman, when she was a child, was sexually abused, as her family is saying, as part of this program or by these police officers, allegedly. How do you begin to work that case?
I kind of have to wonder, Julie, when we talk about the intertwining of these two cases, if the Department of Justice isn't involved in investigating that as well. Because what we're seeing, and one of the things that came out of, I believe, Mr. Jackson's mouth, he talked about the thin blue line becoming a tall blue wall. And it seems like perhaps the Canton Police Department is engaging in a pattern of conduct, if it is, as Dr. Bowden found, to kind of protect their own, if you will. So this could be very much evidence of that, and I think the only way you really truly find out about this is if an outside investigating agency like the Department of Justice is looking into these things. Because whatever you think about the Karen Reed case, I don't think there's anybody that could say that this officer's conduct is okay, and neither would be protecting it.
Right. No, certainly not. If these officers did what the family believes they did, according to the reporting that we've seen out there, then they need to be prosecuted. As I said, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Agent Coffindaffer, last word to you, please. In terms of where this investigation begins, do you think it has begun already? We know the chief of police said he'd be remiss if he didn't remark that he's reviewed the findings of the outside doctor retained by Sandra's family. I was profoundly disturbed and troubled by what I read. He said, while I'm not a trained medical examiner, I'm not qualified to draw any conclusions. The findings certainly warrant further examination at the highest level. Chief Donna McNamara, current chief at the Stoughton Police Department. Jennifer, your thoughts on if something has commenced?
Well, I think something has commenced. It's got to commence in this particular situation. And from what I've read, there are actual text messages. And I think the phone information is going to be critical because my understanding is there are some admissions that were made during those text messages. That, again, is part of the allegations. I think they're going to be able to at least make some conclusions regarding this relationship, regarding what happened, and hopefully get to the bottom through more medical examination regarding what really happened to Ms. Birchmore.
Great points from you both. We've got to leave it there, but we'll continue following the Sandra Birchmore case here on Opening Statements. Jennifer Coffindaffer, Kirk Nurmi, thank you both for your time and expertise. We'll see you later. And coming up here on Opening Statements, we've got one of the people who confronted the Karen Reed supporters joining us live. She's very close to the O'Keefe family and the other families who've become witnesses in this case. And she's going to talk to us about the heartbreaking things that are happening to these people, the abuse that they are suffering that the public doesn't see. She joins us live next.
A-list actor Alec Baldwin is cast in the real-life role he never wanted.
I turn and because the gun goes off.
Criminal defendant.
His lack of gun safety is something that he's going to have to answer for.
We heard that this was a toxic set.
One more.
It's not his fault. He did nothing wrong.
Is there an actor's exemption from liability when they're handling a deadly firearm?